So, good evening, guys. So, this is my third and for now the final lecture on Harold Pinter's play Betrayal. As promised, we'll be talking about the curious, interesting structure that Pinter uses for this play, the reverse chronology, the story being told upside down, and we will talk about the thematic implications of the same. What does Pinter achieve by using such an extraordinary, unusual form, an unusual structure for storytelling, for plays in general. Any further lectures that I do, any further video lectures that I do take up on Pinter's Betrayal will only be done after we have discussed in the group and as and when questions come up or clarifications are necessary. So for now, this is the final lecture, and I urge you to listen carefully and think about the points that I am trying to make. So to begin with, what Pinter is doing, we have already discussed the plot, and you have read the play by now, so you are probably quite acquainted with the storyline. So what Pinter is doing is Pinter is telling the story in a reverse manner. Pinter is starting the story from 1977 and then he is going back into the past. By doing so, what Pinter is immediately achieving is this. Pinter is taking away the aspect of curiosity that keeps us glued to a story. Let me be clearer. When I am reading a story, when I am reading a storybook and the storybook proceeds chronologically forward, what drives us, what keeps us anchored to the story, what keeps us hooked to the story is that we want to know what happens next. So this has happened, you want to know what happens next. Think about any story that you have read, think about any play that you have read. We have done plays before. You want to know what's going to happen next, And the story slowly and steadily, you remember? Slowly and steadily, the Aristotelian plot, the story slowly and steadily rises towards a crescendo, a climax, and then there is a denouement. So that is the normal format of storytelling, normal format of a play, where the story moves forward and you are, as a reader or an audience or a spectator, you are hooked to the story because you want to know what happens to these characters next. For this particular play, that particular aspect of storytelling, what happens next is completely taken away, taken out of the game altogether, because you already know what has happened next, because the story is being told upside down, the story is being told backwards. You already know that Emma and Jerry, they have broken up, that their relationship did not last beyond 7 years, because Emma and Jerry, are meeting after 2 years after they have broken up in 1977. In 1975, when that particular scene is happening, when Emma and Jerry are finally breaking up, you already know that Emma and Jerry will break up in 1975, because you have been already told that they will break up in 1977. When in 1973, Emma is revealing to Robert about her affair with Jerry, you already know that Robert will come to know some way or the other that Emma is having an affair with Jerry. So none of these are surprises. None of these qualify for what happens next kind of a curiosity. You are being told a story backwards. So what happens immediately when such a storytelling strategy is undertaken, when such a dramatic structure is undertaken? What happens immediately is that your focus changes. Your focus changes from what happened, who did it, to how it was done and why it was done. Please note the difference in the question. You are no longer asking from the story to know what happens next or who does what. You are now wanting to find out from the story, how did this come into being? Why did this come into being? So your focus as a reader shifts from the actions that have been portrayed to the motivations behind those actions. You are looking at why are people behaving in a certain manner. You are looking at how they are behaving. You are looking at why they are doing what they are doing. You are looking at, your focus shifts from what is happening to why it is happening. Your focus shifts from what is happening to how it is happening. So as a reader, as a spectator, your focus is much more now on people's behavior and people's feelings and emotions and the way they act, rather than actual actions, because the actual actions have already been revealed to you. Because you, like a god, already know the future. The characters that you are now looking at do not know what will happen in the future. You, as a reader, already know the future, and you are now going back into the story to look at the past. We are, in this particular story, no longer focused on the future. Our focus has shifted from what will happen in the future to what has happened in the past. This is a very, very interesting strategy that Pinter undertakes. Think about, I'll give you two examples. Think about a detective story that you are reading. I know quite a few people who cannot tolerate the anxiety, the curiosity that is involved in a detective story. And I know them, I know people, I know friends, I have friends who often, because they cannot suppress their curiosity for the length of the tale, length of the narrative, they quickly go towards the end of the story and check who is the murderer. In a typical whodunit, they check who is the murderer because they cannot control their curiosity, they cannot control their anxiety, and then they go back and then they slowly, with relish, read the rest of the story. Think about, in another context, think about reading a book that you have already read once. Second reading. Think about second readings. First readings are very different from second readings. When you are reading a novel or a play for the first time, your focus is on basically the actions and what happens next. When you are reading that same play or that same novel for the second time, you already know the story. Now you are no longer because you already know what's going to happen, you already know the end. You are no longer focusing on what is going to happen. You are focusing on how that action is being portrayed, how things are happening rather than what is happening, why things are happening rather than what is happening. As a result, our focus in this particular play, coming back to the play, to the context of the play, becomes not about what happens to Emma and Jerry, because we already know what will happen to Emma and Jerry, not what happens to Emma and Robert, because we already know what happens to Emma and Robert, not what happens to Jerry and Judith. Judith is Jerry's wife. Not what happens to Jerry and Judith, because we already know what happened to Jerry and Judith. They remain together. There is no disturbance in that particular marriage. But our focus is on how they are behaving with each other. How Emma is deceiving Robert for the first 5 years in the relationship, from 1968 to 1973, by going behind his back and having an affair with his close friend Jerry. How the same Emma is deceiving Jerry from 1973 onwards, when Emma reveals to Robert about the affair and does not tell Jerry at all that she has already revealed the affair to Robert. How Jerry is deceiving Robert, how Robert is deceiving Jerry, because Robert knows about the affair and Robert probably values the friendship more, or probably does not care about his wife at all, because we come to know, although Emma is not very trustworthy as a character because she continuously lies and deceives people, we come to know from Emma that Robert had been, in 1977, Emma tells Jerry that Robert had been sleeping around with other women all the time, constantly, throughout their marriage. So if that is true, then how Robert himself is deceiving his wife and his friend. So your focus shifts from what is going to happen to how people are behaving with each other, how people are betraying each other, how people are deceiving each other. I need you to think about this aspect of this particular structure. Next, I told this in my first lecture. I mentioned this in the passing, that the play is partially based on Pinter's own life. In fact, Harold Pinter himself had an affair, illicit affair, with a BBC TV presenter called Joan Beckwell, for quite a few years. The affair went on, actually went on for 7 years. Joan Beckwell was a married woman, and Pinter was having an affair with her. The affair, if I am not too wrong, ended somewhere in the 1970s. And Pinter is writing this play in 1979. So from that sense, if you look at it from that autobiographical sense, this is also Pinter trying to, through the play, analyze his past betrayals, analyze his own life, his own affair. We do not know very clearly how close the story of Emma, Jerry and Robert is to the story of Pinter and Joan Beckwell, but we do know that the plot of Betrayal had been inspired by Pinter's own affair with Joan Beckwell. So it's almost like Pinter is reminiscing, and you remember, you will probably understand when I'm saying this. What I'm saying is that when you start reminiscing, when you're sitting alone, and when you start reminiscing about somebody, your one thought, one memory about a particular person leads to another memory about that particular person, leads to another memory about that particular person, and you slowly and steadily go back to past and another past and another past. So you are going back into a flashback mode. You are traveling through a flashback mode. That is something what usually happens. So in that sense, when Pinter is sitting down to write this play, Betrayal, Pinter is probably going back into his own life. Pinter is being not nostalgic. Pinter is reminiscing about his own life and being analytic about his own life, trying to look at his own life from an objective perspective, and slowly and steadily analyzing his past. And that is why the structure of the play appears very natural. It is almost like one of the characters, Jerry probably, because it is Jerry who appears in the most of the scenes. Jerry is probably thinking back thinking back about each of the episodes that happened in the 9 years that the play covers. So in that sense, the storytelling appears very natural. It is a flashback after a flashback after a flashback. And we are not very unacquainted. Flashbacks are quite common in films, in plays. Flashbacks are quite common, especially in modern plays. We are often taken back to the past. In modern films, all the time we are taken back to the past. Please understand what flashbacks do. Flashbacks shed light on present actions. Flashback clarify reasons, causes, motivations. So when there is a flashbacks help us understand why what is happening is happening. Whatever is happening, there has to be a logical reason behind it, and flashbacks help us to understand that. This play, in that sense, is a series of flashbacks. Pinter is going back in time step by step, 77, 74, 73, and so on and so forth, constantly receding in time. So it's almost like someone is thinking and then thinking about the past and then going back into a greater past and receding further back. So that is more or less about the structure of the play. And the structure of the play is crucially important to the story that Pinter intends to tell. Pinter's story is about betrayal. Pinter's story is about deception. Pinter's story is about people hiding their true feelings. Pinter's story is about words that are used, as I said, to hide ourselves, to give us false masks. Pinter's story is about how people behave with each other in the real world, how we never reveal our true selves in the real world. And in order to bring focus to that, Pinter takes away that driving interest about what happens next. Pinter already tells you what happens next, and then goes back into the past to tell you why it has happened, how it has happened. So that is the importance of this particular structure. As I said, this is my final video lecture for now. We will be discussing this play tomorrow in the group. You can ask any question, any clarification that you need. I'll be happy to provide. If I cannot provide clarifications and answer questions in text mode, and if I feel the need for any other additional complementary video lectures, I'll come back and give another lecture. But this is it for now. I need you to think about the 3 lectures. I need you to listen to it. I need you to read the play, if possible, once again, and come back to me with questions. Thank you very much.